Hello and welcome to Creative Futures, our series of guest speaker talks which aim to give an insight into creative industries and the roles within them. I'm just going to briefly pause to allow everybody to access this webinar and to get set up on their devices. Okay, so hopefully everybody's set up who is joining us today. I think we'll begin with a few introductions. So my name is Lisa Law and I'm one of the career staff here at the university. I'm joined today by Claire Bookerfield. Claire, do you want to just introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm Claire, I'm Public Engagement Coordinator for the Faculty of Arts, Business and Social Sciences at the university, and I work with Lisa on this project. Some of you may know me from the Artsfest talks that we do online. Amongst other things, I work on lots of other public facing events and of course, as I've just said, with Lisa on these talks too. Hope you enjoy.
Thank you. And we're also joined by David Longworth, who's our guest speaker today. David, do you just want to introduce yourself briefly?
Yes, Oren, I'm a new talent scheme manager working for BBC England, based at BBC North in Salford in Greater Manchester.
Okay, thank you. Right, so this is our third instalment of Creative Futures. You might have come along to our previous two talks, or you might be brand new today. Either way, you're very, very welcome to join us. Just to give you an overview of what we're trying to do, we're inviting guest speakers in who work in the creative industries in different discipline areas. And those guest speakers are giving us a real insight into what it's like to work in those professions, and crucially to give us some hints and tips as to how we might break into those roles as well. So you've met David already. He's going to be our guest speaker today, talking about careers in the BBC. We would really welcome any questions that you have. Please feel free to ask anything about the BBC, anything that David's covering. To do that, what you'll need to do is use the Q&A function. And if you get up your Zoom toolbar, you'll see that there. You can type your question to us and we'll answer those questions at the end of the session. We also have the chat feature open as well, and that's so that we can post any information to you that's relevant to the topic today. I would like to remind you that it's a public platform, so don't share anything that's confidential or sensitive. And finally, we will be recording today, so that's for you, so you can watch back this if you'd like a recap, and for others who weren't able to attend today. I think that's all of the housekeeping really, so I'd like to just pass over to David and to say thank you in advance for speaking with us today.
Thank you, Lisa and Claire, and thank you everyone for joining and listening or watching wherever you are. So yes, I'm David Longworth. I'm going to talk you through an overview of careers at the BBC and the different kind of careers you can have within the organisation. That first slide you see there, that's BBC North, that's where I'm traditionally based. And you can see the kind of things we make at that site. You'll see the Blue Peter Badge and Hack of the Dog, because all the BBC Children's education comes from there. The footballers there, because BBC Sport is based there. You'll see the BBC iPlayer sign in the middle of the screen there. That's where the BBC iPlayer team are. So that's kind of where I'm based. And what I do is I work in training and development for BBC England. BBC England is basically all of the major sites around England that's not London. Let's think of it that way. Not just our big sites like Bristol and Salford, so forth, but also Leeds, Blackburn, Nottingham, Coventry, that kind of thing. So I've got a big remit, and I work across our apprenticeships and training schemes. And I help to recruit and mentor new starters at the BBC, and I also talk to colleges and universities about careers at the BBC as well. So that's what I currently do now, very much a mentoring and recruiting role, and doing a lot of outreach as well. However, I didn't always do that. Effectively, I've had two different careers within broadcasting. I actually started out at the BBC in Birmingham, where I worked in television. I started off in what I call the editorial content pathway. I started off as being as a runner, progressed up to being a trainee researcher and researcher, an assistant producer and a producer, all within live television. I also worked for ITV in the commercial sector and eventually moved up to being a senior producer. And I loved it. I love working in television. We can tell you more about what's involved in that later on. I found I've really enjoyed training people how to research and gallery produce and write scripts and so forth. So I made that career change and I moved over to training and development and working on apprenticeships instead. But that shows you an idea of how fluid the industry is. People do move around an awful lot. You're not kind of pigeonholed, you're not kind of staying in one place all the time. Obviously, a lot of it's down to you and what you want to do yourselves. But yeah, people do move around frequently within broadcasting. It's a very fluid industry. So that's kind of thing about what I do, about my background. What do we do? If you don't know, we are a broadcaster. We're kind of a national broadcaster. We make content for you to watch or listen to across TV, radio, or any kind of online platform. We've got 8 TV channels, including CBBC and CBeebies, as I mentioned, 10 national radio stations, over 40 local radio stations across the UK. BBC Learning, which makes bite size, which some of you may have used in the past, and Lockdown Learning, which was a great benefit to all families during the early stages of the pandemic. All those are really important online portals, BBC iPlayer and BBC Sounds, crucially important to us. That's how people are consuming content these days, through one-stop portals like that. And we've got lots of different bases. Okay, the reason why I kind of mentioned what BBC North is before is that a lot of the different sites have particular specialisms. Certain programs are made in certain areas. We've got about 18,500 staff. Over half of those are outside of London now, and that's going to increase in the future. Investing more and more in networks outside of London. There'll be more staff in Birmingham and Newcastle coming up soon. But each BBC centre has its own specialism. So lots of our drama, for instance, like Doctor Who, is made in Cardiff. BBC Three is currently in Birmingham. The natural history units, all those wonderful programmes that David Attenborough narrates, they're made by the teams in Bristol. A lot of major network content, such as Radio 1 Eastons and Strictly, that does come from London. And it depends on kind of career pathways you have as well. For instance, if you're interested in HR, our HR centre is in Birmingham. So different areas have different specialisms. As well as, of course, if you're interested in journalism and local news, we've got all those 40 local radio stations. We've got them all to Cumbria. So there's lots of different places where you can work at the BBC, working on different kinds of content. And I mustn't forget to mention the BBC World Service, broadcasting more than 40 languages around the world. And actually, we've got a lot of job roles around the world, not just in the World Service, which expanded recently, was increasing number of roles in India and Pakistan and Eastern Europe. But because of the nature of our work now, and the way the audience expect everything to be 24/7, especially in the online world, if you take something like the BBC Online homepage, obviously our staff here will have to go to bed at some point, but people still expect to see the BBC News on their phone if they're browsing at 8 o'clock in the morning. And that's where our team in Sydney come in. So we've got a team in Sydney on our online platform who take over the homepage when we all go to bed to make sure the content is refreshed and the latest news stories go on. So there's all kinds of jobs, not only here in the UK, but all over the world in the BBC. So what kind of jobs can you have on the BBC? Here are kind of our main job groups. The first one there, content making. This is what most people traditionally associate with media and broadcasters. The kind of job I had originally for the first half of my career. The people who make the stuff you watch or listen to. Okay, runners, researchers, producers, script writers, camera operators, sound engineers, production management, which I'll tell you more about in a bit. The people who actually make the stuff and come up with the ideas for the things you watch or listen to, the content makers. Next door to that, and also very important, especially for the BBC, are the journalists. A niche form of content making, but so important to us because of all those local radio stations I mentioned, our BBC News channel, a major network news on BBC One at 6 o'clock and 10 o'clock. We make an awful lot of news, and people come to the BBC for news because we're a trusted news storyteller. That's where they come to us for. So journalism is very important to us and gets its own box all of its own. Next door to that is something that people don't often think about when it comes to the BBC, and this is all the business administration, the support functions. Yes, our core business is broadcasting. We're a content maker, we're storytellers. But actually to make that happen, the sheer amount of content that we are responsible for requires a huge support staff team. People like myself, so I work in training and development. Okay, so I'm working in although I don't work for HR, I work in a kind of a HR function, if you like. So I work in training and development. We've got that big HR centre I mentioned in Birmingham. We've got a very big health and safety team throughout the UK. Make sure that all of our sets, all of our programmes are all strictly done to health and safety standards, especially when we're working with children. We make an awful lot of children's programmes. We've got a big health and safety and safeguarding. We've got a marketing and audiences department. Okay, not only about the kind of what trailers we make and where they go on various channels and portals, but also, doing audience surveys, managing audience data. There'll be more about that later when I talk about data analysis. So we've got marketing and audiences. A lot of departments have business managers, people who work out how that department is run as a business. And again, a little bit more about that later. We have lawyers. We need media lawyers, people to get us out of trouble if we say something we shouldn't do on air, or if heaven forbid, there has been an accident somewhere. So, there are huge amounts of support roles at the BBC, all under the business administration banner. And it's the same with any big company. They'll have their core business. They'll also have a lot of other very good careers you can have behind the scenes on the support functions. And finally, on this slide, the biggest expanding area of career growth at the BBC, which is technology. And there are two strands to this. If I was talking to you 5 to 10 years ago, I'll be talking about, and it's still very important, I'll be talking to you about broadcast technology, hardware engineering, if you like. People who can build radio studios, people who know how to fix television cameras. We always need those kind of what we call broadcast engineers. That will never change. However, with the rise of smartphone technology and the way people want to watch content, the way you, the audience, drive it, we now need an army of software engineers, software developers, software testers, UX designers, people who code, develop, design, maintain all of our websites and interactive services. If you want to watch the archery during the Olympics at 4 o'clock in the morning on a phone, then you can do that. If we're showing Glastonbury and you're on your tablet and you want to listen to it on the radio on your tablet, then you can do that. Because it's what I call the democratization of content making now, content watching. It does require a huge array of new job roles, often that weren't too prevalent 5, 10 years ago. I'll get a little bit more on that later. But certainly if you can have a background in software engineering and coding, you quid in, and that's the same for all broadcasters. Us, ITV, Channel 4, international competitors, Netflix, they're all investing in technology. And that is purely audience driven. And it's changing the industry rapidly. The point actually now where you can't really call a television program anymore. If I go to do a talk in a school of a bunch of 12-year-olds and ask them, do you watch television? Nobody raises a hand, because for them it's something their mum and dads do on that big unsightly box in the corner of the living room. But actually they all do watch television programs because they just watch content. They just might consume it on their phone or on a tablet. We call television programs television because that was the only way you could watch those things. So the name of the device became synonymous with the name of the content, but that doesn't apply anymore. So in actual fact, the BBC is a content maker. How you choose to consume that content on what device is entirely up to you. But to fulfill that, we need all these software engineers, UX designers. So that's the main jobs groups. I'm going to quickly go through the main skills gaps. Now, when I talk about skills gaps, this usually are areas where supply can't meet the demand for whatever reason. Doesn't mean all the other jobs I'll talk about aren't important, because they are. These three always, when I talk to our talent teams, managers, these areas are always looking for people: production management, journalism, and software engineering. The one, production management, put simply, is the administrative and logistics side of production. These are not business managers I mentioned before. These are people who actually work on content. They're an integral part of any content making team. And put simply, it's a career pathway that's very undervalued, hugely important to us, and we always need more people in it. And it requires a different mindset from people who are content makers. At the junior level of production management assistant, you could be booking hotels, booking car hire, that kind of thing. You move up to be a production coordinator and eventually a production manager, where you hold the keys to the budget. You can have a fascinating conversation with, say, the production team about what you can and can't do with the budget and the time constraints. And it can often be a very creative role. Production managers I know have had to, back in the pre-pandemic days, had to work out how to get an orchestra on a plane the very next morning, to work out where to find a fake beach, where to buy a fake beach the next day for the production team. But they're also there to deliver the programs we transmitted finally. They're to make sure the music is clear, to make sure we are on budget. The production management team is often the first people to be hired and the last people, at the end to leave. So very important part of the process. And I say, the Top Gear production team might want to race Ferraris around Monte Carlo. The production management team might say, well, actually, unfortunately, with the money I have left, you'll have to make do with minis around Mount Snowdon, and we'll book it for you. And so you get that. That's what production management is about: how to logistically manage so that the program makers get what they want but it has to be on time and on budget. A fascinating career, and we always need more of them. Journalism, and it's a skills gap for a couple of reasons. One is I think this is one of the most fascinating and enjoyable careers you can have in broadcasting. No days are the same. You never know what's going to happen on any given day. It is peak in terms of variety, in terms of job satisfaction. You need real inquisitive personality, real passion for what's going on around you. But it is relentless. It is 24/7. It is a 24/7 news cycle these days. And often you can be working on quite difficult topics. You know, when something harrowing like the pandemic comes along, it's difficult because journalists have to go and cover it, because that's what's in the news. But it's a fascinating career. You have to be reactive to what's happening in the day, but also be proactive and find your own stories. In one sense, that relentless nature means that, you know, it can be difficult to find people because they're after a certain kind of personality. Also, increasingly, we're after people with digital journalism skills, because the rise of user-generated content, people filming things on their phones and sending it in to news offices. You have to wonder, is this footage real? Where's it coming from? How can we verify it? The fact that Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, how people interact on that, how that affects the news agenda, it requires a different way of thinking. So again, skills gap in terms of people with that kind of knowledge of how journalism can work in the digital world. But journalism always a skills gap for us because we've got so much journalism as well. You know, 24/7 news channels, all those local radio, local television news we found. By the way, the local television news bulletin, the BBC, is the most watched news programme in the United Kingdom, because each region has its own bespoke area. When you add them all up around the UK, you're talking about 6-7 million people every night, which is a huge audience. It beats any kind of national news you can find. That's journalism. Third one is, as I mentioned, about technology, without doubt, software engineering. At Salford, we're a bit of a technology centre. I mentioned the iPlayer team is based there. And because of that, if I look at our jobs at Salford every week, I think 90% are something to do with software engineering, mobile application development, coding and design. That many. If you look at the kind of people who make the BBC iPlayer, the BBC weather app, interactive stuff like the Dixie 3 drama and CBBS Playtime app, there's just so much stuff to be done and made and to monitor it. Not just building and designing the websites. And every time there's new programs, new content, the interactive element has to be applied. Every time there's a new series of Springwatch, the interactive element has to be applied. People need to interact with it. That's how something like Springwatch works. Also, there's another aspect as well in terms of the infrastructure. Every time a developer like Samsung or Apple makes a new phone, all of our services have got to work on it. Everything. So every year, all these new devices are refreshed, and everything's got to be worked and with new UI elements, user interface elements onto it. There's a massive process of designing and developing it all. And to be honest, you can't just put a website up anymore, just leave it. The audience, the customers are so sophisticated, they want something that's changing to their needs. So you notice the BBC iPlayer, same thing with Netflix with theirs, their user interface is changing, developing probably every year, maybe twice a year. You'll notice the change in the way it works to make it more accessible, seeing how people use it. So that's software engineering, UX design, and it's a big skills gap because of the sheer amount of stuff that needs to be. That's kind of like some of the main skills gaps. I thought when talking about careers, it's worthwhile just spending a moment talking about freelance and fixed term and staff contracting. At least a quarter of the creative media workforce is freelance. And there's differentiation between kind of what contracts people are on, where they work. So for instance, I work in a support function. I'm not tied to any one program. So I've got a staff job. But with me having a staff job, it's very nice because I get my tax, my tax is sorted for me. I don't have to work out myself. But I can only do what my boss tells me or what I agree with, my yearly objectives. I can't do anything else. Whereas my colleagues who are freelance, they can go off and do what they want when they want. Once they're established, they could spend 3 months working for the BBC, then go off and work for 6 months for ITV, then over to Channel 4. That's up to them. And there's different kinds of roles are more long-term contract or staff-based as opposed to freelance. Things that are 24/7, like children's, where there's 2 children's channels running all the time, we get more likely to have more staff roles there. However, if you look at certain kinds of genres like drama, that's more or less exclusively freelance. So, apart from things like EastEnders, if you get something like EastEnders, which is running all the time, and we've got an in-house set built for it, yes, you'll find permanent staff there. But everything else, you take any kind of program, something recently was on Vigil, for instance, Saran Jones drama, that's a one-off thing. So when that would have been commissioned, the scriptwriter would have had a bit commissioned, When the money was released, only then would they have crewed up to find everybody working on it, the directors, the costume, wardrobe, makeup, the actors, and they would have been contracted to work for as long as it took to make that drama, which would probably have been 4 to 6 months. When it finishes, they all disappear and go off and work something else. The drama, more or less exclusively like that, like the in-house stuff. You know, certain roles like craft roles, for instance, a lot of craft roles are freelance. A lot of camera operators and video editors are freelance. So it's really interesting to see that certain pockets of the industry are very heavily reliant. Freelance staff and other areas are more staff or long-term contract based. But it's worth bearing in mind if you're considering a career in the industry. When we're talking about jobs, I'm going to talk about schemes you can apply for. You don't have to apply for a scheme job at the BBC, but it's a good idea to show you the kind of things we're after, the kind of range of careers you can have. Everything at the BBC is run via our careers website. Okay, so nobody sends in a CV anymore. Everything is done via the website. All jobs, all schemes. That's what it looks like. It's actually bbc.co.uk/careers. Should have put that on the slide. Here's what it looks like. The We're Hiring section is all the current jobs. So all current jobs, from runners, researchers up to very senior roles across all areas of the BBC. That's on the We're Hiring tab. The Kickstart Your Career tab is where all the apprenticeships are. All the apprenticeships. We don't do many internships, but if we do them, they're on there. The work experience, it's not running at the moment due to COVID, but when it comes back up, hopefully in the spring, touch wood, everything like that, every schemes and work experience, it's all on Kickstart Your Career. That's the tab you go to for that. The What We Do section is a different departments of the BBC talking about the kind of things they do. Why Join Us lists the kind of benefits you can get from working at the BBC. Because everyone applies through this online portal, there's a how to apply section guiding through the stages how to apply for the BBC. You can actually set up your own profile on a careers hub. So if you apply multiple times, you don't have to keep inputting your personal details as well. And I mentioned freelancers, there's an awful lot of them in the industry, and they get their own tab as well. So they can store their own career profile as a freelancer and apply for any kind of freelance position that come up. Everything is done via our careers website. And to show you an idea of the kind of roles that are available, last week I did a quick run through of roles that are available. I think this was last Friday when I went on. And just on, I think we had 24 pages on that day of jobs, new jobs. And these were just a selection on the first 2 pages. Music strategy manager, HR advisor, mobile software engineer, business coordinator, data architect, audience research executive, senior journalist for BBC Disinformation. That'll be a team, by the way, that looks at fake news. You know, because we got our reality fact checker, our BBC News, so they'll be part of that team. But you can see the variety of roles, and that's just from pages 1 to 2. Not always just your standard runner or journalist. A really wide variety of careers you can have at the BBC. It's well worth when we look at the schemes in a bit more detail of what we're looking for. This, I think, is probably the most important slide in this presentation, because we get after this an awful lot. And the most important thing we're after is a passion and demonstrable interest for that particular career pathway. Absolutely the most important thing. So, for instance, if you want to be a content maker at the BBC, are you making your own blogs, your vlogs, your own films? Are you volunteering at community radio stations, that kind of thing? Because as I mentioned, you know, people using smartphones to consume content. Well, people can use smartphones to make it very, very easily. And so many people do now via YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. Okay. And so it's almost kind of like expected. If you want to be a content maker, it feels a bit strange if you're not. I'll give you an example. If I had 2 individuals, one was a university undergraduate, it was just and they'd only ever made content for their course. Kind of because they had to, really, because they didn't make it, they'd failed the degree. And then I got someone from leaving 6th form who studied chemistry, biology, and maths at A-level, but has their own YouTube channel and regularly does films on TikTok. Me personally, I would take the 6th former every time, because they are a content maker. They're not waiting for permission, not doing it as part of a course. They're doing it because they naturally love doing it. And they picked up their phone, they've just started doing it. It's that kind of thing they're after. That's how you make a difference. That's how you stand out. And it's the same for any kind of career pathway. You know, one of our very first software engineering apprentices, they designed their own game engine while they were at 6th form. Didn't have to do, they just loved, you know, coding and game engine design. one of our very first production management apprentices. She joined us straight from college. She'd done nothing at all to do with media before, but liked the idea of the job and applied. And at interview, it turned out that at sixth form, there was a music rehearsal studio because she was part of a band. And people used to drop in all the time at the same time after lessons and argue and squabble about who would use the studio space. And this really annoyed her. So she started setting up a booking system that people had to book a particular time to come in and do it. And that's proved really successful. So then she set up an online version. Then she started using it not only to do rehearsal spaces, but book concerts. Before she basically turned it into a whole concert venue and organised it all. Those were the natural skills of a production manager, the planning and logistics mindset you have. She had a passion, she had a demonstrable interest in it. And it's that kind of thing they're after. The second thing is to be ready to bring your own ideas to the table. Broadcasting is an industry that thrives on new ideas. We're always adapting to the audience. So this is across any pathway, by the way, career pathway, by the way. The audience is always changing. We always need new ideas. Not only new ideas for new formats, for new programs, but also new ideas to keep old formats fresh. You take something like Blue Peter, which has been going for, what, 60 years? Match of the Day, again, over 50 years. So how do you keep these long-standing programs fresh, relevant for new audiences? How do you make them more accessible? How do we make them more accessible, better for younger audiences? You know, we always need new ideas, so don't be afraid to bring your own ideas to the table. We're interested to try it on it. There's a third point here, and it's worthwhile mentioning. People do ask how they get in touch, and we always say don't be afraid to get in touch. Everyone I know within the industry is really helpful. They always want to help people get in because they realise it's really tough to get into broadcasting sometimes. The only thing that stops them is time constraints. So don't be afraid to make contact on sites like that. But the way to do it is to not to be aggressive, not to go, you know, give us a job, not to keep on hassling every day or every other day. Think of it as relationship building, keeping in touch but not overdoing it. Asking them, you know, would you mind looking at my CV or my LinkedIn profile? And have you got any hints for me? Do you have any ideas of what's the best way to make a start in the career pathway? It's building a relationship. It's making contacts. That's the way to do it. I'll say if I talk to some of our talent managers, they're always happy to hear from people. So don't be afraid to, if you see us at a careers fair or you come across us on LinkedIn, don't be afraid to say hello. But without a doubt, it's that passion and interest for that particular career pathway that's really important. Quickly, some FAQs. I guess a lot about writers. Writers are mostly freelance. Okay. The only kind of the great resource for any budding writers is the Writers' Room. Great online site that's got a whole repository of old scripts. They regularly do competitions and workshops for writers across both, you know, audio and visual content. They do a lot of stuff for radio, for instance. So anyone interested in writing, the Writers' Room is a great portal for you. Most video editing roles are freelance or they're outsourced to other companies. We have very few in-house video editing roles. Okay. Acting, cast an awful lot of actors. They're freelance. They're hired by casting directors and agencies. We don't have any acting schemes. It's recruited for in a very different way than most of the standard roles. And actors are freelance. And I guess an awful lot about presenting. And most presenters are one of the following. They're a journalist. Journalists at the BBC by definition are presenters because they're broadcast journalists. They have to be on air at some point on television or radio. So they're trained journalists. Another way of being a presenter is an expert in a current or previous field. You know, Brian Cox, Alice Roberts, Gary Lineker, they're all experts in doing something else first and moved into broadcast media. So some of them still do both of it. Alice Roberts is still an academic as well as a television presenter. And a lot of people do it because they're already working in the industry in a normal production role. They've learnt the nuts and bolts of how it works. They've learnt the craft. They've not set out to be a presenter, but they've gravitated towards it. Someone like Michelle Ackerley, who you'll see on the One Show or Country File, she was a researcher in BBC Children's. I think about Helen Skelton, another former Blue Peter presenter. She was a team assistant at Radio Cumbria. So people just kind of gravitate towards it and get spotted. But they've already learnt the nuts and bolts of doing it. And we get a lot of presenters from a theatrical comedy background as well. Very occasionally, you might see a scheme that tries to recruit for presenters. Our New Voices campaign, BBC England, it's something that we do this. Probably the most regular ones we have, where we're trying to look for fresh voices to appear on radio. But apart from that, they're very thin on the ground. most of the things you see on that slide is how people get in to be a presenter. And on to entry-level schemes. So again, I want to talk you through these because not that you have to do them, but they are a very good way of, first of all, a very good way of getting into the business. Because often when we do an apprenticeship, it's not just one job role you're applying for. They are schemes with multiple places available. Often you'll get relevant qualification and training along with it. They're all paid. They are all paid jobs. And often they're quite long contracts as well. 18 months to 2 years. And some of them, especially in software engineering technical roles, can be 3 to 4 years. So they'll give you a great grounding in that particular career pathway. And also by talking about them, you can see the variety of careers that you see as well. And again, all of them are run on our careers website. Quick pause for that. So I'm going to look at our core business in more detail. So we'll look at production and journalism, and we'll look at the versions that are most appropriate for grads, if you're kind of leaving university with a degree. And this is the production training scheme. This is really interesting actually, because across most of our career areas over the last 10 years, we've developed a set of apprenticeships roughly aimed at college leavers, and then a set of graduate schemes roughly aimed at graduates. Not all of them are graduates, but they're kind of aimed at the graduate market. Virtually all of those graduate schemes have now been turned into level 7 post-grad apprenticeships. Apart from this one, this is the only one left of the old grad scheme, trainee schemes. It's still just a trainee scheme. So this is the production trainee scheme, been running for many, many years, our flagship kind of entry-level role. We've also got a lower level apprenticeship in this area, but for grads, this is the most appropriate one. And I said previously about what they're really after, a passion and interest for program making. Look at the bottom of this slide, minimum requirements. We're not looking at qualifications. There is no academic entry requirement. For our flagship, actually trainee scheme aimed at graduates, they are not bothered if you have a degree or not. They are bothered if you have solid evidence of your passion for creating content. That's absolutely bottom line what they're after. Look at again, who's it for? You'll already have some solid evidence of your passion for creating content, demonstrating your creativity, drive and ideas. You might have some experience already, whatever level. Definitely looking at more graduate level on this scheme. You get academy training. That's BBC Academy, by the way, the internal training division of the BBC. But we're training you how to research, how to pitch, making content on social media, writing for online, shooting, editing skills, both visual and audio skills. It's an 18-month program. When you finish, you move into junior researcher and researcher roles. And that's what distinguishes it from our lower level apprenticeship in this area. People doing that scheme, we moved into kind of runner, trainee researcher roles. Here you go straight into kind of more researcher level. And if you kind of look at the kind of things you'll be doing on the production training scheme, you're kind of doing what I did when I started out in my career. You're researching, you're finding contributors to appear on your program, liaising with the great British public, you're sourcing locations, you're finding props, you're kind of in the process of developing and pitching your own ideas. You're setting up all those shoots, no matter it's an audio or on filming shoots, learning the basics of the admin side of things, the call sheets, the health and safety. Okay, and you also, depending on the kind of role you want to do, you could be doing some craft skills as well. Some people like specialize more on the filming side, self-shooting side, or editing, for instance. Making podcasts as well, so important to us now. But again, increasingly, you'll learn those production management skills as well, booking transport crews, that kind of thing. So great scheme, and that's the best entry route into people are looking at making content in the BBC, our production training scheme. Again, look, they're not looking at qualifications. This is a slide that shows you a bit more detail about what they're after, and you can kind of get the idea here. Are you committed to get unheard voices and previously untold stories to BBC audiences online? Are you bursting with fresh new ideas? Do you have a voice that you feel is not currently being heard on the BBC? Do you have opinions on how we can connect better with our audiences? Again, this awareness of ideas, awareness of the audience, not just about can you come up with a good idea for a programme, but who are you making it for? Who's watching or listening to it and why? That's what they're after. And that's what you'll develop and be trained via in the production training scheme for. So that's the PTS. However, you look at journalism, either one of our core business roles, this was the journalism training scheme, our flagship journalism training. It's now been turned into an apprenticeship. It's a postgrad apprenticeship. It is now a level 7 senior journalist apprenticeship, designed with the NCTJ National Qualification in Journalism, training you in long form digital journalism, data journalism, there's a term I hadn't heard 5 years ago, podcasting, reporting stats. It's brand new. This is a brand new qualification we developed. We rejigged everything over the pandemic, and this is brand new for our budding journalists to apply for. 2-year program. Eventually, you'll be migrating into a staff role as a journalist. We do have a lower level version of this called Fast Track. You don't move straight into be a journalist at the end of it. For this scheme, aimed at more graduate or people with experience, your aim is to train you to be a journalist by the time you finish the scheme. And again, you know, look at the way they've worded it. You've probably completed a journalism diploma or other journalism qualification. Or you might have been on our lower level apprenticeship, but probably. Or you've begun building your storytelling ability through less than 12 months freelance journalism. So actually, you might not have a degree at all. You might have just been making your own content. You might be making your own blog. So I mean, this scheme is for everyone. People really interested in journalists, people who are graduates. It could be print journalists who want to be retrained in broadcast journalism. It could be people who've just been doing their own blog in journalism for their own 5 years or thrown back. So it's a very broad scope for who they're looking at. And this is the kind of thing you'll be doing in the journalism. You're working alongside news teams, okay? Hands-on experience, researching, writing, broadcasting news. Usually BBC Sport has one of our places every year on this as well. Not guaranteed every year, by the way. But they're after people with a fascination for news and current affairs, the inquisitive nature around you. One way I can do it, myself personally, I can distinguish a journalist is if I ask them, can you tell me about something that's happening in our local area? And if they do know something, that gives me an idea they've got the journalism mindset, because you would know instinctively what's happening in a local area. That's the kind of thing you're after. Quite important to us, actually, because of all our local radio stations. But they're after people who are naturally curious about the world around them. Good storytellers who can help us reach new audiences, including people, as I say at the bottom, who might not normally consume news. Have you got a different approach to telling the news and getting the news across? Especially in the rise of the way people consume news. A lot of people get the news off Facebook these days. Outlets like Facebook or Instagram, or the way it spreads across social media sites. How do we react and get across the news in those kind of formats? The news is changing rapidly. It's quite fascinating. That's our kind of scheme, our journalism apprenticeship, advanced apprenticeship. We're aimed at budding journalists now. So they're the two most appropriate for graduates for our core business. But we've got a whole other range of apprenticeships. All the ones I'm going to show you in the next two slides have been recruited for in the previous 12 months. Can't guarantee they're going to be available every 12 months. Some areas will have them every year, some won't. The first set are really interesting. These were all brand new. While the pandemic was raging and unfortunately had to cancel a lot of our recruitment, we designed these 3 new apprenticeships at different levels, all to do with data analysis. A level 4 apprenticeship for people leaving college, a data analyst degree apprenticeship, people want to study a degree in it, and a postgraduate apprenticeship, people who've got a degree, all in data. I wouldn't have seen this 5 years ago. This is now so important to all businesses in terms of what do we do about people's data. We hold a huge amount of people's data at the BBC. Also, this is how do we interact with the audience to make our services better and more appropriate and more targeted. This is going down the realms of personalization, how iPlayer and how things, portals like Netflix and Amazon Prime work via personalization. They give you a very personal service in terms of what you're listening to or what you're kind of watching. It's how people use our websites. You know, our colleagues in UX design, they have to work out how people are moving through a website. How far down do they scroll? How many pages do they go through? Do they give up at a certain point? How do we use that data to make the service better so that they find what they want more easily? How do we make it more accessible? How do we do audience surveys better? You know, all that kind of stuff. It's all data analysis. So it's a fascinating career, and we developed 3 apprenticeships different levels to cater for it. I mentioned production management before. We've got 2 brand new apprenticeships in production management. So not only is there an element if you apply for our production apprenticeships where you get trained in production management, but people who really know they only want to do production management, we've got 2 specific apprenticeship levels there as well, including 1 postgrad. We've got level 7 postgrad legal apprenticeship. I mentioned media lawyers before, so we've got one of those. A digital marketing degree apprenticeship. Okay, I talked about the marketing and audiences department before. I'll be with them. We need finance people. I forgot to mention them before. We have finance. Every department has a finance team. We all have budgets to go to, and that's, I do as well. I have to report into our finance team about my activities and what I'm doing. So we need accountants. We developed apprenticeship for there. We've got a business management degree apprenticeship. And for business management, I'll give you an example of what that means, as opposed to production management. So production managers are working on a production. Creative role, working with the production team to make sure a piece of content gets made. A business manager works holistically around the whole department in terms of how much money we've got, how can we allocate it to get all the content made. BBC Sport's the best example. So BBC Sport work across events that happen all around the world, World Cups, Olympics, Commonwealth Games, that kind of thing. To go and cover that kind of event where you, for instance, a World Cup in Brazil, and it runs for an entire month, and you're working with external stakeholders in Brazil who you don't know, and you might have to use their stuff on the ground or their facilities, and you've got to find out where you're going to base and make decisions about how you're going to have a studio there and here in the UK. It requires, that's what the business management team do. Working out how they do that, as opposed to, say, a production manager on sport who would work on the World Cup programme itself, if that makes sense. The business managers look across the whole department. And that's what business managers do. We do a degree apprenticeship in it. We've got HR support, all the people who organise everyone's contracts and organise assessment days and recruitment days. HR and all the that are on hand to look after us as staff. We've got a big team in Birmingham. We do a HR support apprenticeship. If I go on, I'm at UX design. I should have talked a bit more detail about this before, but UX design means user experience design. These are people who design the websites and interactive services. And monitor how people move through them. What font size should we use? What colour is the website going to be? How do people navigate the way through it? How many pages is it going to be? That's UX design. Really intriguing mix of coding, design, and psychology almost. And we got an apprenticeship and a grad scheme in that. Software engineering, the building and coding of all our websites. We do a grad scheme and a master's in that usually. I mentioned broadcast engineering before. People who install radio desks, but know how to kind of fix TV cameras. In fact, broadcast engineers have to know how every single piece of technology works within the BBC buildings. Whether it's a television in the canteen that people can watch, or whether it's their outside broadcast trucks that keep us on air for local news. They have to know how it all works and how to fix it. And we do a degree apprenticeship in that. And we also got a grad scheme in R&D. Now, R&D is research and development. It's the high end of tech. It's the people at one's hand who will make decisions on what the BBC is going to invest in terms of technology. So for instance, a few years back when 3D was all the rage, they had to make a decision whether we're going to invest in 3D. We didn't, which was a good idea because actually 3D TVs didn't take off just when they were first made in the 1980s. They didn't take off again. So but the R&D train staff in technology and work out how we're going to use it. At the moment they're looking seriously into machine learning, personalization, artificial intelligence, what this means for broadcasting. So R&D is kind of the next level above software engineering. We're talking machine learning kind of levels and new technologies, and they run a grad scheme. All those kind of recruited over the last 12 months to give you an idea of the breadth of the kind of stuff we're looking at here in terms of the BBC. I said before I move off these slides, we're hoping to have some new apprenticeships opening this November, so this month. Don't know when they're going to open, but they should be across business and technology areas. The best thing to do for our schemes is that there's never a set time of the year they always open. Traditionally, business and technology open in the autumn, winter, and the editorial content roles like production and journalism tend to open later in the winter or spring, so from January onwards. But as a rule of thumb, I would always check every month. Check our Kickstart Your Career tab on our careers page once a month, because usually they're available for 4 to 6 weeks. You shouldn't miss out if you check every month. But it's always good to keep checking our website. But we should have some opening in business and technology areas later this month. The application process for these schemes, it's worthwhile just mentioning, there's the online application form section on the website. When you go on your Kickstart Your Career, it'll then list a series of career areas. It'll go production or technology, business, that kind of thing. So if you click on business, it'll list all the schemes across the business functions. You click on the scheme you want. Each scheme usually has its own page with full details of what you need to do to apply. And they usually leave it up even when we're not recruiting, just so you can have an idea of what it's like. It does open for recruitment already. You click on the Apply Now button, and it takes you through a portal where you ask a series of online questions. Increasingly, there's a second stage if you get through the online written assessment part. Not across all schemes yet. Certainly in production and journalism, we'll be doing a video submission stage. And usually they'll ask you another question, or they might actually tell us about an program idea you have, talk it through on video submission. They always give you hints and tips about how to do it, and you don't have to submit your piece of video until you're absolutely satisfied. Okay, so you can redo it as many times as you want. If you get through those stages, you're invited to an assessment day, which at the moment we kind of be doing online via Zoom. Hopefully in the future, touch wood, we'll get back to doing it in person. But an assessment day would usually have 3 exercises. You get a strength-based interview. There's a group exercise where you work with other members of a team to work through a little problem, and you always get told what you're being assessed against, usually things like teamwork and communication, see how you're working together as a team. And then usually there's another exercise that's more relevant to the scheme. Journalism might have to do a late-breaking story, software engineers might have to do a bit of coding kind of exercise, usually something else that relates to the scheme you have to do as well. So that's the kind of standard of way we run kind of our assessment days at the moment. And that's true for our schemes. Not always the way with standard recruitment, which is more traditional, just straightforward interview based. It's interesting to know that, you know, they might take strands of our apprenticeship and training scheme recruitment, apply it into non-recruitment, because this kind of approach where we do different kind of exercises so people can have different ways they can show what they can do is proven very valuable. But yeah, that's the way our scheme assessment process works at the moment. And then we're back to the website. That's the careers website, and all the things I've discussed are on the Kickstart Your Career tab. That's where all the apprenticeship and training schemes are. And that's the formal end of the presentation. So we can go through any questions if there are any, because I realise I've covered quite a lot of ground very quickly there.
Thank you so much, David. That was so interesting and thorough. There's an awful lot that you've covered there that I didn't know about at all about the BBC. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. Claire, are there any questions?
There are. Okay, so one here from Anonymous. Can you apply for the training scheme if you're not a UK national? I'm from Germany and would love to apply.
Your nationality doesn't matter, but you do have to have the right to work in the UK. So it doesn't matter if you're from Germany or wherever, but you must have the right to work here.
Okay, great, thank you for that. So this one's from Marcia. Can you advise if there are any requirements to enter the graduate scheme for administration and business?
I wouldn't say. The best thing to do is when because the business admin schemes don't always recruit each and every year. I'm hoping we'll have some of the business management scheme opening this year, but the requirements, because sometimes they do change from year to year, but the core business like production journalism will be running every year, but some of the business ones kind of do every other year. So the ones that are going to be opening this autumn winter, I wouldn't want to second guess what they're going to do this time around because they might have tweaked them. The best thing to do is to wait to see, because each of the web pages will go through the requirements in a lot of detail when they're ready, but they might tweak them each time they kind of run them. So I can't give you an exact answer to that question, but they will be very clearly stated on the web page for that particular scheme.
Okay, that's great. And if you've got any more questions for David, please do pop them in the Q&A. We've got, one's just popped in. Oh, a thank you from Marcia. We have got 10 minutes if anybody wants to pose any questions.
While everybody's thinking about it, I have a question actually. I think you might have already answered it. It's about speculative applications. Sometimes the suggestion is that if jobs aren't formally advertised, and just to show your interest in working for an organisation, you'd find somebody that's kind of the department head or in charge of the kind of setting that you want to be in, and you'd approach them to say that you'd like to do some work experience. Is that a good thing to do, or is everything formally advertised through the website?
I mean, we're kind of trying to get away from the kind of that backdoor route in these days. I mean, it still can happen in some instances. Everything is formally done on the website, even the work experience. When the work experience comes back up, we're not allowed to do informal work experience anymore. All work experience placements are done centrally, and hopefully when in the next spring when the work experience placements should come back online. I didn't really talk about them much because they're not running at the moment, But usually they are 2-week placements. They're unpaid, but they're usually before the pandemic, we do over 1,000 work experience placements every year, which is a great taste away in, see what it's like. And on the work experience page, you would search for our location, and you find a location, and then it lists all the different work experience placements that are available, and you kind of click on and do like a mini application. It's usually just one question about why would you want to do this, what benefit would you get out of it. But it's all very formally arranged. So we don't kind of do informal work experience placement. We get lots of requests to, but we just do it. And it's just the fairest way, to be honest.
That makes sense.
Well, in terms of speculative queries, as I mentioned in the presentation, there's nothing stopping you approaching BBC staff wherever you find them on LinkedIn or Careers Fair and asking their advice and building up your contacts. You know, that still goes on. It might not get you a job, that's not the point, but it's kind of there to build up your contact list, you know, to get a feel for what different areas are looking for. I think that's something I should mention as well, especially if you're into content making, is to really do research on particular content areas. But when you do get to meet someone, you know the right questions to ask. You know, working BBC Children's is very, very different from working BBC Sport. You know, so if you do meet, for instance, one of the talent team from BBC Children's, you know, you know what you're talking about when it comes to CBBC and CBBS. But you know your difference between Tracy Beaker and In the Night Garden. You know, you got to know your stuff. Because actually, if you don't, it looks like you've not done your research. You don't know what that department does. You know, it's the same way. It's the old guidance, isn't it? If you're going to approach someone, research the company. And all BBC content areas are very different from each other. So that's definitely something I'm doing. If you're going to go and try down the speculative approach and make contacts, is to find out about that content area first. You can make best use of that content.
Yeah, that's good advice. We have a question from Marcia. I am a mature social policy student. Is there an age limit to apply for a graduate scheme?
No.
Okay.
No, not at all. I was doing some interview assessment days for one of our apprentices apprenticeships yesterday, and there were candidates in their 60s. It doesn't matter. There's no upper age limit. It's illegal to have any upper age limit in the employment law in the United Kingdom. So it doesn't matter how old you are.
There's hope for you and I yet, Lisa.
Well, I think, David, you might have convinced me to give it a go, actually.
I was just thinking that too.
Are there any other questions at all from the audience?
No, not at the moment.
David, would it be possible to get a copy of the PowerPoint at all?
Yes.
Just because there's an awful lot of information there that was so valuable. I was making lots of notes, but I won't have captured everything. It'd be nice to be able to share that.
It's not a problem at all.
Thank you. Okay, any other questions? Last chance before we say bye to David. Okay, right, well, I guess we'll conclude our session then. Thank you so much, David, for all of the insights that you shared today. Like I said before, an awful lot of content there, a lot of information for us to process. And for all of you in the audience, please feel free to sign up for our future Creative Futures talks. The next one features Lisa Hassel, and she's the founder of Inky Goodness, which is a collective of creatives who are all working together to support each other. Through that, she runs all kinds of support systems, such as webinars, coaching, there's competitions as well, exhibitions, and she's here to talk to us about her own career pathway and also what she does through Inky Goodness. So please feel free to sign up through the website, which is the university website /Creative Futures. And if there's no other questions, I think we'll conclude today. Thank you all for joining us and listening attentively to David, and thank you again to David.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us today.